Bing bongy bong, bing bongy bong. This is Joe, the bearded historian. He'll tell you an interesting story. Be careful of his soldiers, they can be brats. This is Angel, she's an entity. She'll cause chaos and plant her hands at you. This is Sue, she likes spirits, not the alcohol. She's the reason this channel exists. This is David, he likes fire trucks. He's here occasionally. Bing bongy bong, bing bongy bong, bing bongy bong. We preserve his story.
Alright, welcome to Wayback Wednesday, which might actually get up on Wednesday, but we'll see. I've got a funeral to go to, so we'll see how I feel after that. But either way, we're going to get this race out of the way. Our race is planes because the video is about planes. Well, at least a person who invented a plane. Are you ready? Here we go. Shout out time. Here's a shout out just for you. You support me, so I'll support you. This shout out is for our friends. Let's see who it is today. Alright, there goes our planes. Let's see if I can see some names. There's Tracy. There's Vintage. There's Ford. Scott. Eastad. Kel. Ford. Nature. Dushegi. Generations. Delta. Michael. Ryan. Shanster. Popcorn. Barry. Kaja. Matthew. Dirt Digger. Lakeshore. Sunrise. Demi. Jennifer. Cinephile. Eastad. Andy. Pete. Parks. Oh, it's going to be Parks. Alright, this is National Parks Princess. Update for 2026. This year I will be highlighting California's state parks on our travels out of state. There's other state parks. So, of course, she enjoys hiking and parks, and she does a bit of traveling. So if you like parks, if you like travel, and like outdoor stuff, this is a good channel for that. I catch a lot of her regular videos, which are premieres. Always fun, interesting places, so check her out. Like, share, comment, and enjoy the video whenever I get it up. Alright, Files, the bearded historian thinks he's right. He's going to tell you why. Don't believe any of it.
Well, I could be right or I could be wrong. I think I'll go with right, though.
I like being Wong.
You like being wrong? Okay.
Wong is very unique.
You can also be flat, too, but that's beside the point. Now, Orville Wright is, some would say, the lesser known of the two brothers, Orville and Wilbur Wright. The interesting part about these two folks, his birthday was on August the 19th, 1871, and they were pretty much, that most people already know, were the American aviation pioneers, generally credited with inventing, building, and flying the world's first successful airplane. Made the first controlled, sustained flight of an engine-powered, heavier-than-air aircraft with the Wright Flyer on the 17th of December in 1903, 4 miles south of Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, what is now known as Kill Devil Hill. 1904, the Wright brothers developed the Wright Flyer 2, which made longer duration flights, including the first Circle, followed in 1905 by the first truly practical fixed-wing aircraft, the Wright Flyer 3. Are you sensing a pattern here? Not much, right?
Nah.
Yeah. Now, for the brothers, go all the way back. Let's talk about kids. Let's talk about childhood. Interestingly enough, they were 2 of 7 children.
Wow.
Gordon and Milton Wright, a clergyman, and Susan Catherine Corner.
Ooh.
They did not have middle names.
It's always weird when people. I've heard of a few, and it's just like I don't understand.
Yeah, apparently.
How do you know if you're in trouble if you only have two names?
I know, you must really yell loud to get their attention, because otherwise, I don't know who's yelling for me. And interestingly enough, the mother was descended from the progenitor of the Vanderbilt family, money, and the Gano family of New Rochelle, New York, the Huguenots. Now, Wilbur was born near Millville, Indiana in 1867, and Orville, of course, came along in 1871 in Dayton, Ohio. The brothers never married. The other Wright siblings were Rochelle, Lauren, Catherine, and the twins Otis and Ida. Now, none of the Wright children had middle names. None. All 7 were just 2 names.
You know what? I think Mom and Dad just decided that was too much work. They couldn't think of that another name.
Pretty much.
They had to come up with first names, coming up with middle names. Just they couldn't do it.
Yeah. And it said the father tried hard to give them distinctive first names. Wilbur was named for Wilbur Fisk, and Orville for Orville Dewey, both clergymen that Milton Wright admired. They were Will and Orv to their friends and in Dayton, and their neighbors knew them simply as the bishop's kids, or the bishop's boys. Now, because of their father's position as bishop in the Church of the United Brethren in Christ, he traveled often, and the Wrights frequently moved 12 times before the family returned permanently to Dayton in 1884. In elementary school, Orville was given to mischief and was once expelled. In 1878, when the family lived in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, their father brought home a toy helicopter for his 2 younger sons. The device was based on an invention by French aeronautical pioneer Alphonse Pinard, made of paper, bamboo, and cork with a rubber band to twirl its rotor. It was about 1 foot long. Wilbur and Orville played with it until it broke, and then built their own. In later years, they pointed that their experience with the toy was the spark of their interest in flying. Now, both brothers would go to high school, but did not receive diplomas. The family's abrupt move in 1884 from Richmond, Indiana to Dayton, where the family had lived in the 1870s, prevented Wilbur from receiving his diploma after finishing 4 years of high school. The diploma was awarded posthumously to Wilbur in 1994.
That's kind of mean.
Yeah.
He's dead. He don't care.
He don't care, 127 years old. I don't think he's going to need it.
It also took him 100+ years to do it.
No kidding.
That's just mean.
I would say thanks, but no thanks, guys. You blew it already. In late 1885 or early 1886, while playing with an ice skating game with friends, Wilbur was struck in the face with a hockey stick by Oliver Crook Hull, who later became a serial killer. Wilbur lost his front teeth. He had been vigorous and athletic until then, and although his injuries did not appear especially severe, he became withdrawn. He had planned to attend Yale. Instead, he spent the next few years largely housebound. During the time, he cared for his mother, who was terminally ill with tuberculosis, read extensively in his father's library, and ably assisted his father during times of controversy within the Brethren Church, but also expressed unease over his own lack of ambition. Orville dropped out of high school after his junior year to start a printing business in 1889, having designed and built his own printing press with Wilbur's help. Wilbur joined the print shop, and in March the brothers launched a weekly newspaper, the West Side News. Subsequent issues listed Orville as the publisher and Wilbur as the editor on the masthead. In April 1890, they converted the paper to a daily, the evening item, but it only lasted 4 months. They then focused on commercial printing. One of their clients was Orville's friend and classmate, Paul Laurence Dunbar, who rose to international acclaim as a groundbreaking African-American poet and writer. For a brief time, the Wrights printed the Dayton Tattler, a weekly newspaper that Dunbar edited. Now, capitalizing on the national bicycle craze, spurred on by the invention of the safety bicycle and its substantial advantages over the penny farthing design, In December of 1892, the brothers opened a repair and sales shop, the Wright Cycle Exchange, later the Wright Cycle Company, and in 1896 began manufacturing their own brand. They used this endeavor to fund their growing interest in flight. In the early 1890s, they saw newspapers or magazine articles, probably photographs of the dramatic glides by Otto Lithnol of Germany. In 1896, brought three important aeronautical events. In May, Smithsonian Institution Secretary Samuel Langley successfully flew an unmanned steam-powered fixed-wing model aircraft, and in mid-year, Chicago Engineer and Aviation Authority, Octave Chanute, brought together several men who tested various types of gliders over the sand dunes along the shores of Lake Michigan. In August, Lilienthal was killed in the plunge of his glider. These events lodged in the minds of the brothers, especially Lilienthal's death. The Wright brothers later cited his death as a point when their serious interest in flight research began. Wilbur said, "Lilienthal was without question the greatest of the precursors, and the world owes to him a great debt." In May of 1899, Wilbur wrote a letter to the Smithsonian Institution requesting information and publications about aeronautics. Drawing on the work of Sir George Cayley, Chanute, Lilienthal, Leonardo da Vinci, and Langley, they began their mechanical aeronautical experimentation that year. Now, the Wright brothers had always presented an unfilled image to the public, sharing equally the credit of their invention. Biographers note that Wilbur took the initiative in 1899 and 1900, writing of my machine and my plans before Orville became deeply involved with the first-person singular, became the plural we and our. Author James Tobin asserts it was impossible to imagine Orville, bright as he was, supplying the driving force that once started their work and kept it going from the back room of the store in Ohio to conferences with capitalists, presidents, and kings. Will did that. He was the leader from the beginning to the end. Now, despite Lilienthal's fate, the brothers favored his strategy to practice gliding in order to master the art of control before attempting motor-driven flight. The death of British aeronaut Percy Pilcher in another hang-gliding crash in October of 1899 only reinforced their opinion that a reliable method of pilot control was the key to successful and safe flight. At the outset of the experiment, they regarded control as the unsolved third part of the flying problem. The other two parts, wings and engines, they believed were already sufficiently promising. The Wright brothers' plan thus differed sharply from more experienced practitioners of the day, notably Adler, Maxim, and Langley, who all built powerful engines, attached them to airframes equipped with untested control devices, and expected to take to the air with no previous flying experience. Although agreeing with Lilienthal's idea of practice, the Wrights saw that the method of balance and control by shifting his body weight was inadequate. They were determined to find something better. Now, on the basis of observation, Wilbur concluded that birds change the angle of their ends of their wings to make their bodies roll right or left. The brothers decided it would also be a good way for a flying machine to turn, to bank or lean into a turn just like a bird, and just like a person riding a bicycle, an experience with which they were thoroughly familiar. What is equally important was that they hoped that this method would enable recovery when the wind tilted the machine to one side for lateral balance. They puzzled over how to achieve the same effect with man-made wings and eventually discovered wing warping, which Wilbur idly twisted a long inner tube box at a bicycle shop. Other aeronautical investigators regarded flight as if it were not so different from surface locomotion, except the surface would be elevated. They thought in terms of a ship's rudder for steering, while the flying machine remained essentially level in the air, as did a train or automobile or a ship at the surface. The idea of deliberately leaning or rolling to one side either seemed undesirable or did not enter their thinking. Some of these other investigators, including Langley and Chanute, sought the elusive idea of inherent stability, believing that a pilot of a flying machine would not be able to react quickly enough to wind disturbances to use mechanical controls effectively. The Wright brothers, in contrast, wanted the pilot to have absolute control. For that reason, their early designs made no concessions towards built-in stability, such as dihedral wings. They deliberately designed the 1903 first powered flyer with ahedral drooping wings, which are inherently unstable but less susceptible to upset by gusty crosswinds. Now, on July 27, 1899, the brothers put wind warping to the test by building and flying a biplane kite with 5-foot wingspan and a curved wing of 1-foot chord. When the wings were warped or twisted, the trailing edge that was warped down produced more lift than the opposite wing, causing a rolling motion. The warping was controlled by 4 lines between kite and cross sticks held by the kite flyer. In return, the kite was under lateral control. In 1900, the brothers would go to Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, to begin their first gliding experiments. In his reply to Wilbur's first letter, Octave Chanute had suggested the mid-Atlantic coast for its regular breezes and soft sandy landing surface. Wilbur also requested and examined the U.S. Weather Bureau data and decided on Kitty Hawk after receiving information from the government meteorologist stationed there. Kitty Hawk, although remote, was closer to Dayton than other places Chanute had suggested, including California and Florida. The spot also gave them privacy for reporters who had turned the 1896 Chanute experiments at Lake Michigan into something of a circus. Chanute visited them in camp each season from 1901 to 1903 and saw gliding experiences, but not the powered flights. Now, the Wrights based their design of their kite and full-size gliders on the work done in the 1890s by other aviation pioneers. They adopted the basic design of the Chanute Herring biplane head glider, the double-decker as the Wrights called it, which flew well in the 1896 experiments near Chicago and used aeronautical data on lift from Otto Lilienthal had published. The Wrights designed the wings with camber, a curvature of the top surface. The brothers did not discover the principle, but took advantage of it. The better lift of a cambered surface compared to that of a flat one was first discussed, specifically by Sir George Cayley. Lilienthal, whose work with the Wrights carefully studied, used cambered wings in his gliders, proving in flight the advantage over flat surfaces. The wooden uprights between the wings of the Wright glider were braced in by wires, and their own version of Chanute's modified Pratt truss, a bridge-building design he used for his biplane glider, initially built as a triplane. The Wrights mounted the horizontal elevator in front of the wings rather than behind, apparently believing the feature would help to avoid or protect them from a nosedive and crash like the one that killed Lilienthal. Wilbur incorrectly believed the tail was not necessary, and the first 2 gliders did not have one. According to some Wright biographers, Wilbur probably did all the gliding until 1902, perhaps to exercise his authority as older brother and to protect Orville from harm, as he did not want to have to explain to their father, Bishop Wright, if Orville got injured. What a concept. Now, the brothers flew that first glider for only a few days in early autumn of 1900 at Kitty Hawk, and the first tests, probably in October. Wilbur was aboard when the glider flew as a kite and not far above the ground, with men below holding tether ropes. Most of the kite tests were unpiloted, with sandbags or chains and even a local buoy as a ballast. They tested wing warping using control ropes from the ground. The glider was also tested unmanned while suspended from a small homemade tower. Wilbur, but not Orville, made the dozen-line glide on only a single day, October 20th. For those tests, The brothers trekked 4 miles south to the Kill Devil Hills, a group of sand dunes made about 100 feet high, where they made camp in each of the next 3 years. Though the glider's lift was less than expected, the brothers were encouraged because the craft's front elevator worked well and they had no accidents. However, the small number of the free glides meant they were not able to give wing warping a true test. The pilot lay flat on the lower wing as planned to reduce aerodynamic drag. As gliding ended, the pilot was supposed to lower himself to the vertical position through an opening in the wing and land on his feet with his arms wrapped over the framework. Within a few glides, however, they discovered the pilot would remain prone on the wing head first without undue danger while landing. They made all of their test flights in that position over the next 5 years. In 1901, before returning to Kitty Hawk that summer, Wilbur published 2 articles, The Angle of Incidence in the Aeronautical Journal and the Horizontal Position During Gliding Flight in Illustrated trying to pronounce this in English, Illustrated Aeronautical, looks like middle engines for some reason. The brothers brought all of their material they thought they would need it to be self-sufficient at Kitty Hawk. Besides living in tents once there, they built a combination workshop and hangar measuring 25 feet long by 16 feet wide. The ends opened upward for easy glider access. Hoping to improve lift, they built the 1901 glider with a much larger wing area and made dozens of flights in July and August for distances of 50 to 400 feet. The glider stalled a few times, but the parachute effect of the forward elevator allowed Wilbur to make a safe flat landing instead of a nosedive. These instances wedded the Wrights even more strongly to the canard design, which they did not give up until 1910. The glider, however, delivered 2 major disappointments. It produced only about 1/3 of the lift calculated, and sometimes pointed opposite the intended direction of the turn, a problem known as an adverse yaw when Wilbur used the wind warping control. On the trip home, a deeply dejected Wilbur remarked to Orville that man would not fly in 1,000 years. Boy, is he in for a shock.
Good.
The poor lift of the gliders led the Wrights to question the accuracy of Lilienthal's data, as well as the Smeaton coefficient of air pressure, a value which had been used in over 100 years and is part of the accepted equation for lift. The Wrights used the following lift equation to calculate the amount of lift that a wing would produce. Heaven forbid we try to read algebra here.
Algebra?
L equals KSV squared, C is the integer of L. L is the lift in pounds. K is the coefficient of air pressure. S is the total area of lifting surface in square feet. V is the air velocity over wing, headwinds plus ground speed in miles per hour. And the C/L is the coefficient of lift, varies with wing shape.
Cool.
Now, over the years, a wide variety of values has been measured for the Smeaton coefficient K. Chanute identified up to 50 of them. Wilbur knew that Langley, for example, had used a lower number than the traditional one. Intent on confirming the correct Smeaton value, Wilbur performed his own calculations using measurements collected during the kite and free flights of the 1901 glider. His results correctly showed that the coefficient was close to 0.0033, similar to the number Langley used, not the traditional 0.0054, which would significantly exaggerate predicted lift. Now, the brothers decided to find out if Lilienthal's data with lift coefficients was correct. They devised an experimental apparatus which consisted of a freely rotating bicycle wheel mounted horizontally in front of the handlebars of a bicycle. The brothers took turns pedaling the bicycle vigorously, creating airflow over the horizontal wheel. Attached vertically to the wheel was a airfoil and a flat plate mounted 90 degrees away. As air passed over the airfoil, the lift it generated, if unopposed, would cause the wheel to rotate. So like something the Mythbusters would have played with. Now the flat plate was oriented so the drag would push the wheel in the opposite direction of the airfoil. The airfoil and the flat plate was made in specific sizes such that, according to Lilienthal's measurements, the lift generated by the airfoil was exactly counterbalancing the drag generated by the flat plate, and the wheel would not turn. However, when the brothers tested the device, the wheel did turn. The experiment confirmed their suspicion that either the standard Smeaton coefficient or Lilienthal's coefficient of lift and drag, or all of them, were in error. They then built a 6-foot wind tunnel in their shop, and between October and December of 1901, conducted systematic tests on dozens of miniature wings. The balances they devised and mounted inside the tunnel to hold the wings looked crude, made of bicycle spokes and scrap metal, but were as critical to the ultimate success of the Wright brothers as were their gliders. The devices allowed the brothers to balance lift against drag and accurately calculate the performance of each wing. They could also see which wings worked well as they looked through the viewing window at the top of the tunnel. Their tests yielded a trove of valuable data never before known, and showed that the poor lift of 1900 and 1901 gliders was entirely due to an incorrect Smeaton value, and that Lilienthal's published data was fairly accurate for the test he had done. Now, before the detailed wind tunnel test, Wilbur traveled to Chicago at Chanute's invitation to give a lecture to the Western Society of Engineers on September 18, 1901. He presented through a report about the 1901 glider experiments and complemented his talk with a lantern slideshow of photographs. Wilbur's speech was the first public account of the brothers' experiments. A report was published in the Journal of the Society, which was then separately published as an off-print titled Some Aeronautical Experiments in a 300-copy printing. Now, in 1902, Lilienthal had made a whirling arm test on only a few wing shapes, and the Wrights mistakenly assumed the data would apply to their wings, which had a different shape.
That makes sense. Now,
How? The Wrights took a huge step forward and made basic wind tunnel tests on 200 scale model wings with many shapes and airfoil curves, followed by detailed tests on 38 of them. An important discovery was the benefit of longer, narrower wings. In aeronautical terms, wings with a larger aspect ratio, wingspan divided by chord, the wings front to back dimensions. Such shapes offer a much better lift-to-drag ratio than the stubbier wings the brothers had tried so far. With the knowledge and more accurate Smeaton number, the Wrights designed the 1902 glider. Now, the wind tunnel tests, made from October to December 1901, were described by biographer Fred Howard as the most crucial and fruitful aeronautical experiments ever conducted in so short a time with so few materials and so little expense. In their September 1908 Century magazine article, the Wrights explained the calculations on which all flying machines had been based were unreliable, and every experiment was simply groping in the dark. We cast it all aside and decided to rely entirely upon our own investigations. 1902 glider wing had a flatter airfoil, with the camber reduced to the ratio of 1:24, in contrast to the previous thicker wing. The larger aspect ratio was achieved by increasing the wingspan and shortening the chord. The glider was also a new structural feature, a fixed rear vertical rudder, which the brothers had hoped would eliminate turning problems. However, the 1902 glider encountered trouble as crosswinds and steep bank turns when it sometimes spiraled into the ground, a phenomenon the brothers called well digging. According to Combs, they knew that when they when the earlier 1901 glider banked, it would begin to slide sideways through the air, and if the side motion was left uncorrected or took place too quickly, the glider would go into an uncontrolled pivoting motion. Now, with vertical fins added to correct this, the glider again went into a pivoting motion, but in the opposite direction, with the nose swinging downward. Going downward with your nose is probably not a good thing to do with a plane. Now, Orville apparently visualized the fixed rudder resisted the effort of corrective wing warping when attempting to level off from a turn. He wrote in his diary on the 9th of October the 2nd, I studied out a new vertical rudder. The brothers then decided to make a rear rudder movable to solve the problem. They hinged the rudder and connected it to the pilot's warping cradle so that in a single movement by the pilot simultaneously controlled wing warping and rudder deflection. The apparatus made the trailing edge of the rudder turn away from whichever end of the wings had more drag and lift due to warping. The opposing pressure produced by turning the rudder enabled corrective wing warping to reliably restore level flight after a turn or wind disturbance. Furthermore, when the glider banked into a turn, rudder pressure overcame the effective differential drag and pointed the nose of the aircraft in the direction of the turn, eliminating the adverse yaw. In short, the Wrights discovered the true purpose of a movable vertical rudder. The role was not to change the direction of flight, as the rudder does in sailing, but rather to aim and align the aircraft correctly during banking turns and when leveling off from turns and wind disturbances. The actual turn, the change of direction, was done with roll control using wing warping. The principles remained the same, with ailerons superseding the wind warping. Now, with their new method, the Wrights achieved the control of the turns for the first time on October 9th, a major milestone. From September 20th until the last weeks of October, they flew over 1,000 flights. The longest duration was up to 25 seconds, and the longest distance was more than 600 feet. Having demonstrated lift, control, and stability, the brothers now turned their focus to the problem of power. Thus did 3-axis control involve wing warping for roll, forward elevator for pitch, and rear rudder for yaw. On March 23, 1903, the Wrights applied for their famous patent for a flying machine based on the successful 1902 glider. Some aviation historians believe that applying the system of 3-axis flight control in the glider was equal to or even more significant than the addition of power to the 1903 flyer. Peter Jacob of the Smithsonian asserts the perfection of the 1902 glider essentially represents the invention of the airplane. So that's where our brothers came up with the idea for their Wright brothers, the Wright flyers, and wound up creating 3 separate models as things went along. Of course, part of the problem that they started running into problem also was engines, because obviously, if they're going to have forward, thrust, they had to find a way to put an engine on this thing and keep it flying. To keep the weight down, the engine block was cast from aluminum, a new practice at the time. A Wright-Tyler engine had a primitive version of a carburetor with no fuel pump. Gasoline was gravity-fed from the fuel tank mounted on a wing, strut into a chamber next to the cylinders when it was mixed with air. The fuel and air mixture was then vaporized by heat from the crankcase, forcing it into the cylinders. The propeller drive chains, resembling those of bicycles, were supplied by a manufacturer of heavy-duty automobile chains. The flyer cost less than $1,000, in contrast to more than $50,000 in government funds given to Samuel Langley for his man-carrying great aerodrome just a few years earlier, in 1898. The Wright flyer had a wingspan of 40.3 feet, weighed 605 pounds, and had 12 horsepower, and a 180-pound engine. Now,
On July 24th, 1903, Wilbur made a second presentation in Chicago to the Western Society of Engineers. He gave details about their 1902 experiment, the glider flights, but avoided any mention that their plans for powered flight. And of course, as we look at the fun facts, they say camp at Kill Devil Hills. The Wrights endured weeks of delays caused by broken propeller shafts during engine tests. After the shafts were replaced, requiring 2 trips back to Dayton, Wilbur won a coin toss and made a 3-second flight attempt on December 14, 1903, stalling after takeoff and causing minor damage to the flyer. Because December 13, 1903 was a Sunday, the brothers did not make any attempts that day, even though the weather was good, so their first powered test flight happened on the 121st anniversary of the first hot air balloon test flight that Montgolfier brothers had made on December 14, 1782. In a message to their family, Wilbur referred to their trial as having only partial success, stating, "The power is ample, and but for a trifling error due to a lack of experience with this machine and the method of starting, the machine undoubtedly would have flown beautifully." Following repairs, the Wrights finally took to the air on December 17, 1903, making 2 flights, each from level ground, into a freezing headwind gusting to 27 miles per hour. The first flight by Orville at 10:35 a.m. of 120 feet for 12 seconds at a speed of only 6.8 miles per hour over the ground was recorded in a famous photograph. The next 2 flights, approximately 175 and 200 feet, by Wilbur and Orville respectively, and their altitude is about 10 feet above the ground. The following is Orville Wright's account of the final flight of the day. Wilbur started the fourth and last flight at about 12 o'clock. The first few hundred feet were up and down as before, but by the time 300 it had been covered, the machine was under much better control. The course for the next 400 or 500 feet had but little undulation. However, when about 800 feet, the machine began pitching again, and in one of its darts downwards struck the ground. The distance over the ground was measured to be 852 feet. The time of the flight was 59 seconds. The frame supporting the front rudder was badly broken, but the main part of the machine was not injured at all. We estimated the machine could be put in condition for a flight again in about a day or 2. 5 people would witness this flight: Adam Etheridge, John T. Daniels, who snapped the famous first flight photo using Orville's pre-positioned camera, and Will Doe, all of the U.S. government coastal life-saving crew, area businessman W.C. Brinkley, and Johnny Moore, a teenage boy who lived in the area.
Ooh.
After the men hauled the flyer back from its 4th flight, a powerful gust of wind flipped it over several times,
Oops.
despite the crew's attempt to hold it down. Oops. Severely damaged, the Wright flyer never flew again.
Oh, no.
The brothers shipped an airplane home, and years later, Orville restored it, leading it to several U.S. locations for display, and then to the Science Museum in London, before it was finally installed in 1948 at the Smithsonian Institution, its current residence. The Wrights sent a telegram about their flights to their father, requesting that he inform the press. However, the Dayton Journal refused to publish the story, saying the flights were too short to be important. Meanwhile, against the brothers' wishes, a telegraph operator leaked a message to a Virginia newspaper, which concocted a highly inaccurate news article that was reprinted the next day in several newspapers, including Dayton. The Wright brothers issued their own factual statement to the press in January. Nevertheless, the flights did not create public excitement, if people even knew about them, and the news soon faded. In Paris, however, Aero Club of France members, already stimulated by Chanut's reports of Wright gliding successes, took the news more seriously and increased their efforts to catch up to the brothers. An analysis in 1985 by Professor Fred E.C. Kulick and Henry R. Jex demonstrated that the 1903 Wright Flyer was so unstable as to be almost unmanageable by anyone but the Wrights, who had trained themselves in the glider. In a recreation attempt of the event in the 100th anniversary, Kevin Koksberger, piloting an exact replica, failed in an effort to match the success of the Wright brothers achieved with their piloting skills. What a concept. But yeah, they pretty much were able to get their place in history set up by developing this happy plane out at Kitty Hawk. A couple following years, in 1904, the first flights revealed problems that they had with the longitudinal stability.
Blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, blah, 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 blah.
Blah, blah, blah,
Solved
blah, blah.
by adding ballast and lengthening the supports for the elevator. During the spring and summer, they suffered many hard landings, often damaging the aircraft and requiring minor injuries. On August 13th, making an unassisted takeoff, Wilbur finally exceeded their best Kitty Hawk effort with a flight of 1,300 feet. They then decided to use a weight-powered catapult to make takeoffs easier, and tried it for the first time on September the 7th. On September the 20th, 1904, Wilbur flew the first complete circle in history by a manned heavier-than-air powered machine, covering 4,080 feet in about a minute and a half. Their best two flights were November 9th by Wilbur and December 1 by Orville, each exceeding 5 minutes and covering nearly 3 miles in almost 4 circles. By the end of the year, the brothers had accumulated about 50 minutes in the air in 105 flights over the rather soggy 85-acre pasture, which remarkably is virtually unchanged today from its original condition, and are now part of the Dayton Aviation Heritage National Historical Park and adjacent to the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Well, the Wrights would scrap the battered and much repaired aircraft, but saved the engine, and in 1905 they built the Wright Flyer 3. However, at this time, the same marginal performance as the first two. The maiden flight was done on the 23rd of June, and the first few flights were no longer than 10 seconds. After Orville suffered a bone-jarring and potentially fatal crash on July the 14th, they rebuilt the Flyer with a forward elevator and rear rudder, both enlarged and placed several feet farther away from the wings. They also installed a separate control for the rear rudder instead of linking it to the wing warping cradle as before. Each of the 3 axes, the pitch, roll, and yaw, now had its own independent control. These modifications greatly improved stability and control, enabling a series of 6 long flights ranging from 17 to 38 minutes and 11 to 24 miles around the 0.75 miles course of the Huffman Prairie between September 26th and October 5th. Wilbur made the longest flight, 24.5 miles, in 38 minutes and 3 seconds, ending with a safe landing when the fuel ran out. The flight was seen by several invited friends, their father Milton, and neighboring farmers. Reporters showed up the next day, only their second appearance in the field since May of the previous year, but the brothers declined to fly. Their long flights convinced the Wrights they'd achieved their goal of creating a flying machine of practical utility which they could offer to sell. Now, the only photos of the flights of 1904 and 1905 were taken by the brothers. A few of the photos were damaged in the Great Dayton Flood of 1913, but most survived intact. A 1904 Ohio beekeeping businessman, Amos Root, a technology enthusiast, saw a few flights, including the first circle. Articles he wrote for his beekeeping business were only published eyewitness reports of the Huffman Prairie flight, except for the unimpressive early hop local newsmen saw. Root offered a report to Scientific American magazine, but the editor turned it down. As a result, the news was not known widely outside Ohio and is often met with skepticism. The Paris edition of the Herald Tribune headlined a 1906 article, "The Wrights, Flyers or Liars?" Charming. It's like, we're going to do something impressive, and guess what? Nobody's going to believe us.
I believe them. Do you not believe them?
I believe them, because nothing against them. Surprised they didn't wind up getting killed some of these times.
Right? It is amazing that they did not get killed, but fly, little man, fly.
Yeah. But, you think about all the things that they did, and this was even before World War One.
Right.
And, when they were using aircraft in World War One, they were still very, very rickety, very unstable. But by that time, the bug had gotten into the people's minds. Let's see what we can build. The British wanted to build aircraft. The French were trying to build aircraft. The Germans wanted to have their own versions of the aircraft. And I mean, granted, they were biplanes. They were not, super flyers like we've got nowadays.
Right.
But it was part of that miracle of time that these guys started coming out with all this different type of aircraft. And it was kind of impressive seeing what they could do from 1903. They finally were able to make a turn.
Right.
Until, all of a sudden they had huge bombers. They had fighters flying in the air. The leaps that they took and went through. The thing I always thought was also kind of funny about this whole concept with the Wright brothers is Orville died in 1948. So he got to see what the invention of the aircraft became. He lived through World War II.
Wow.
He lived to be the age of 76 years old. Wilbur, surprisingly enough, died younger. He died in 1912 at Dayton, Ohio. They were both pilot trainers, inventors, manufacturers. But, Wilbur died at the age of 45, while Orville lasted until he was 76.
Wow.
But that's been our little trip down history lane, Wayback Wednesday. And Sue's going to throw me out with the garbage, so this will be the last show.
Maybe I'll put you on a plane.
Ooh, could be fun.
It could be fun. Just don't skydive out.
Oh, no. I'm only jumping out of a plane if the engines don't work anymore.
And
then I'm going to have the parachute.
Yes, they don't feel me parachute. That was one of those too.
The great question, though, why did they call it a parachute if there's only one?
That's a good question how they came up with that.
Yes.
I'm sure it means something in another language.
Probably.
Like praying for ground not to hurt me.
Yeah.
Alright, let's see what we got here. 45 minutes.